Today is March 25th, 2009. I am Karen Aronson. I'm speaking this afternoon with Emily V. Wade, known as Paddy, a 1945 graduate of MIT who has served for about 30 years on the corporation. She's now a life member emerita. She was also the second woman to serve as president of MIT's Alumni Association. While on the corporation, she served on a variety of committees, including its executive committee and its development committee, and also its joint advisory committee with students known as CJAC. And she has been the corporation's representative to the MIT Community Service Fund and served for many years as its co-chair. Paddy, before we discuss these activities, I'd love to talk about how you came to MIT at a time when there were very few women here. And even where did you grow up, and were you deep into math and science as a kid?
Well, I grew up in Portsmouth, Rhode Island, mostly, and I don't know that I was deep into math and science. I was very interested in the natural sciences, and I had a good friend who was later a Harvard fellow and a ecologist. And so I got introduced early on to the natural world, the birds and the collected leaves and mushrooms and things like that.
Did you think of going into that part of science? Or?
I don't know. No, the reason I then went for high school, I went to a girls' finishing school down in Virginia called Foxcroft, and had a good science teacher whom I enjoyed very much. And what sparked me to go really to MIT was there was an article in Collier's magazine about the wonderful world we were going to have with U-235, the uranium that it goes into making bombs. They didn't mention the bombs part. They were talking about using it for making electricity and powering your house, and there was a lovely picture in this article. And I guess that's what inspired me to go on into science. And I applied both to MIT and Cornell, and I got into both of them and came to MIT.
Did you know that MIT took women? Did you check into that specially, or did you just assume they did?
I have no idea. I have no memory.
No
memory.
I
assume someone told me along the line that they took women.
Could have said Paddy and they wouldn't have known, right?
Yeah, that's right.
How did your friends and family react to your decision to go to MIT?
Well, it's supportive.
Uh-huh.
No problems
Surprise
whatsoever.
or?
I don't remember, to be honest. I don't think so.
What was MIT like when you were there?
It was very different from what it is now. It was fun. The one thing you had to have, because in those days there was no such thing as women's lib. There was no such thing as harassment or any of the problems that one has nowadays. At least they were there probably, but you never they were not talked about and they were not acknowledged. And no one did anything about any of it. The one thing that I think was really important was to have a sense of humor, because the boys really liked to tease the girls. And there were only 7 of us in my class.
Out of about?
And there were 728 freshmen. And there were 95 girls in all of MIT, but most of them were graduate students. The undergraduates were, as I said, there were 7 in my class. I don't remember what there were.
Were you at all close to each other? Or did they bond? Or?
Yeah, somewhat. I roomed with one of the girls, and I were in an apartment together over in Boston. Not my freshman year, because I lived with my distant cousin my freshman year. But beginning in the spring, in the summer, I had an apartment.
Did they have the girls' boarding house yet?
No, there was nothing.
Ah.
Nothing at all for girls. And you had to have your own facility to live in.
And the male classmates were basically friendly? They teased you, but
they teased,
it was
but
good-natured?
Yeah, it was good-natured, and you kept being asked to freshman smokers, which you didn't go to, because they didn't realize you were girls in most cases.
What were the smokers?
I have no idea. I never went.
I mean, were they like fraternity rushing, or was it something different?
I think it was just for freshmen and sort of getting to know everybody in the class or something like that, or maybe they were connected with, they may have been connected with rushing. I don't know. As I said, I never got that far.
Were there freshman picture books then where you had? No. So it
No.
wasn't that they all said, oh, here are the 7 women in the class. And
no. It was very different. And some of the things that were different at Tech, for instance, women could only swim, I think it was Sunday, and maybe there was one evening in the week. The rest of the time, the swimming pool was strictly male.
No trunks required?
That's my guess. I never peeked. But, and the other thing is, there were no sports to speak of. I mean, maybe there were sports, but I don't remember ever hearing about sports.
Right. No girls' sports, certainly.
Oh, certainly not. And whether there were boys' sports, there may have been, but I honestly don't know.
There must have been crew.
Oh, yeah, I think there was crew. Yeah.
Carl Mueller and crew.
Yeah, there was, because...
I don't know, yeah. And you ultimately married a classmate.
Yes. Whom I met very early on in my first year. In fact, within the first month. He was the brother of, or the brother-in-law of a naval officer who had been in Panama with my father, who was in the Navy also, in the summer and fall of 1941, just before Pearl Harbor. And by the time, or I don't know, at some point, Ellery Sedgwick and Sis told my father that, oh, my brother's going to MIT, and Daddy said, oh, Paddy's going to MIT, and they've got to look you up. So he called me up and asked me for cocktails.
Ooh.
And that really threw me. I don't drink cocktails. Still don't. And so I got all dressed up. And that rather threw him, too. So we went and had a Coca-Cola each. And that didn't work very well. And then finally, at that point, I was living in Boston, just temporarily, until I moved into my cousin's house. And then finally, he called me up sometime in the winter and asked me out to go to the play. And he had a little car, roadster, and so he picked me up. It was raining, and I had a fur jacket. And it looked like Silver Fox, but it was skunk. And so it had gotten wet, and so I sat. We were all crowded in. There was another couple. And he had his nose buried in my fur jacket, and that broke the ice. From then on, we were great friends.
You shared a lot of interests in the sciences?
Yeah, well, he was in the business section, so we never had classes together. But we certainly had a lot of interests together. Including
dancing?
Yes, we did a little at MIT, but once we were married before we graduated. We were married the last term of our senior year. See, it was during the war, and we went all year round. Right. We only had 10 days off between years, as well as 10 days off between semesters. So we took, during the final semester of our senior year, which was February to June, Jeff decided he wanted to go to join the American Field Service, and because he was 4F because of hay fever and eyes, and we wanted to get married. We'd been engaged a year, and so we got married on St. Patrick's Day. And then he went overseas, and I came back to MIT and finished during the summer my thesis.
And then he finished later?
And then he finished the following spring. He came back just before Thanksgiving and finished, because he went to India and the war ended.
How did the professors treat you and the other women students? I mean,
very nicely.
Did they recognize?
Yeah. Professor Sears, I think, had a little jaundiced eye on the women students, but maybe that's because I used to knit in his class. But and in 10-250, we'd have to sit in the front row. But I got to know Dean Petrie, I guess. He was chemistry, and I can't remember another one, professor, the chemistry professor. A lot. We used to see them a lot, and it was very informal and very nice relationship.
Did all the students relate to them this way, or did you have a special comfort? One of your classmates, one of your friends, said she was just in awe of how relaxed you were and how you had referred to one professor as Gigi to his face, I think. And she said, I just figured, oh, well, maybe they're not so. But, I mean, did everybody?
I honestly don't know. I grew up in, I have 3 half siblings. My sisters are twins, and they're 6 years younger than I am. They're half sisters. And then my brother was born the year I was married. But, so I grew up essentially with my father. And he was in politics. So I grew up meeting all sorts of kinds of people and you know, relating to them somehow. And so it wasn't hard.
You were relaxed around adults?
Perfectly relaxed around adults and around men, because that was really what I related to.
Interesting.
I had a lot of fun. I enjoyed tech very much.
But it sounds like you worked hard too.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
as do most.
Yes. I did. I don't know whether I could work as hard as they have to work nowadays, but I did work hard. But I'd been well prepared, because Foxcroft, I had a history teacher who was a marvelous history teacher. She really made you work and laid out how, sort of taught you how to study and how to allot your time and how to work. And that made a big difference.
And chemistry? What was your attraction
I'd had chemistry.
to that?
I had chemistry
that
at
was
Foxcroft
your major,
also. Yeah.
Right? Why chemistry?
Because I thought that I wanted to study uranium, U-235, and I thought chemistry was the way. And anyway, I'm better at chemistry. I never could do physics. It's word problems. I don't work well with word problems. I like formulas. So it wasn't until I went to try and do a thesis on uranium that I discovered, oops, I'm not qualified to do a thesis on uranium. So I did one on a chemical subject.
On chemical?
On sugars. On proving out a German patent that said that you could go from a 6-carbon sugar to a 5-carbon sugar by treating it with bromating it and silver.
When you entered MIT, did you have a plan for the rest of your life that you were going to go be a chemist or something, or that you were going to work or not work?
I don't think so. I did work at MIT for a year when Jeff, after he came back.
What did you do?
Cleaned up after the boys in the freshman labs in the morning and in the PChem lab in the afternoon.
Ah.
But the problem in the freshman lab was the boys all knew more than I did, and they were all veterans that had just come back, and they were all older than I was.
And you were married besides.
Yes.
Do you think being at MIT during the war affected the experience? I mean, were there a lot fewer, I don't know, I mean, were there fewer male students because of that, or?
That may have had something to do with it, although we got a big influx of V12 students from Lehigh. V12 were Navy recruits, or they all came in naval in GOBS uniforms, in sailors' uniforms, and so that was a big influx that came in at one point.
To get their degrees,
to get their
or to
degree.
study some?
Get their degree.
How interesting.
Yeah, and I'm sure it was very different. But the thing that was quite different is that there was a complete lack in the boys that were there, or at least the ones that I ran into. There was no interest in anything outside of their chemistry major. And, you know, this was the time we had Dunbarton Oaks, we had the formation of the United Nations, and all of this was going on. And having been brought up in a political family, I was interested in all of these things. And we had to take a course in chemistry. We had to take a course in public speaking because we had to do an oral thesis. And in that course, we had to make a speech and write a paper and make a speech on it. And I took some United Nations thing or something. And the boys turned to me and said, well, why did you talk about that? You know, and they had talked about some chemical process or reaction. And it was very interesting. And now, of course, the students are so interested in what's going on in the world. And
Yeah. Did you ever think of going into politics yourself?
no,
No.
no.
Do you think your father's experience was a good one? I mean, did he enjoy his time? He served.
Daddy, in many respects, was very shy, so I think it was very hard for him in many things. But he was governor of Rhode Island for 2 years, beginning in '38, and he did a wonderful job. And he put in the first civil service bill, I believe. He also put in a 2% sales tax. And someone over in South Shore, South County, said when they collected the 2 cents from somebody, they said, "One for Bill and one for Ann." That was his wife's name.
That's funny.
But we.
So after you graduated, you worked at MIT for a year.
Just for a year.
And then did you?
We went down to Roanoke, Virginia, and he worked for American Viscose after he graduated from MIT. And they had been told by somebody that they should be more efficient, and they should bring in efficiency department. So they hired a head of it, and they hired Jep, and they hired some other younger people like Jep, and established them in an office. And then the union came to the head of American Viscose and said, "If you let them in on the floor of the factory, we will go on strike." And Viscose couldn't have cared less. They were making money hand over fist anyway, making rayon. And so they said, okay. So Jep would go every day. He'd take a book, and he'd sit in his office, and every once in a while they'd have a meeting or something. But there wasn't anything to do. And so he put up with it for 3 months. And then he quit. And he went and taught at VPI, Virginia Polytech.
Yeah.
Of course, a business course type, because that's what he knew. And it turned him off of teaching completely, because the boys would come in and they'd sort of sit and they'd read something, a newspaper, or they wouldn't pay any attention. And he was furious. And before he did that, he had applied to Harvard Law School and gotten accepted for the following fall. And we came up here, and we've been in Massachusetts ever since.
So you've been back in Boston.
Yeah.
And he became a lawyer.
Yeah, and he came to MIT as a patent lawyer. That was his first job out of law school.
So you both got your...
Kenway, Jenny, yeah.
How long did he stay? Brief?
I think it was about 3 years, maybe, before he went to Choate Hall and Stewart.
He went into private practice, handling...
Yeah, well, he was working for a Kenway Jenny law firm that was MIT's patent lawyer.
I see.
And so he was just working for them, but they had put him at MIT because of his experience. It was a fascinating time, because it was when J. Forrester patented the memory core. And there were a lot of other very important patents that were coming out at that time. So it was a wonderful time
Out of
to
the
be a patent lawyer
radiation
here.
labs and so forth?
Yeah.
Interesting. Did you... So at that point, you stopped working and started
raising a family? Yeah, I've been a volunteer ever since. And I worked with the American Red Cross and helped set up the first blood bank in Boston, the Blood Donor Center, which was on Dartmouth Street, I think.
It's interesting that they hadn't had one, and you thought, gee whiz, that's...
No, I didn't have anything to do with it. They were doing it, but I just worked on it and just volunteered with the Red Cross.
What prompted you to move into the volunteer area rather than continuing to have a paid job? Did you think about it consciously, or it was just the thing to do?
No, well, to be honest, I didn't need the money, so
Right.
I thought that this was something. And my father had always brought us up on the idea of giving where we could and being involved in having a civic duty.
Yeah, I heard a tale about when you were a student, you used to save money by walking across the bridge.
Well, it wasn't to save money. I just walked across the bridge.
But then you would put money into a charity pot or something?
I think
was
someone
that?
was making things up. I don't remember doing that
Maybe
at
she
all.
did that and you
Yeah.
didn't. Okay,
I did walk across the Mass Avenue Bridge a lot,
a
though.
lot.
Yeah. But
Did you expect when you left MIT to come back and get involved? Or did you
No,
stay involved all those years? Or?
when we were, one of the other things that was different during the war was I don't remember Carl Compton at all, who was the president. I mean, maybe I saw him, but I honestly don't remember ever seeing him. Mrs. Compton, however, was always there. And she took a special interest in the women and couldn't have been nicer. She was a wonderful person. And she was just great. I knew Dr. Killian very well for some reason at some point. And we used to go to Bill Coolidge's. Bill Coolidge was a graduate and was very involved with MIT. And he had a wonderful place up in Topsfield. And he'd have a Sunday sort of open house where he'd ask interesting groups of people. And Jim Killian was a great friend of his and was usually there. And we were fortunate enough to be asked a couple of times. And so I got to know a lot of the presidents somehow. Jay Stratton we knew quite well, and Kay, of course, and Howard. And then Jerry Wiesner. Jep was on the search committee for him, I believe. And so all through the years, we've somehow managed to keep in touch and keep involved. I don't know really how.
So your husband actually was on the corporation for a number of years. I mean, he seemed to
He was
know
in the
these
70s,
people.
yes.
And I mean, were they interested, do you think, in his knowledge about intellectual property and patents?
Well, one of the things that he did a lot of, he was on the investment committee, and he was very instrumental in working out sort of the modern way that MIT managed its money with Glenn Straley. And he was very instrumental in that.
Glenn was treasurer
Yes,
or in
Glenn
the
was treasurer.
treasurer's office. So
Yeah.
he spanned a number of presidents.
Yeah.
And so Jep, though, served for about a decade, I guess.
Yeah, he was 10 years. He was almost all the 70s. And Howard called him in when, you know, when they had the riots everywhere. And
in the late 60s,
yeah.
right.
Jep was on the corporation then, evidently.
And Howard Johnson was president.
Yes, Howard was president. And Howard called Jep in, and Jep came and sat with Howard while they were trying to break into his office.
My.
But
What did your husband think of that experience?
well, he found it interesting.
What was his view of the protesters and the protests and the anti-war?
I honestly don't remember. I don't know.
What was your view? Did you have a reaction?
No, I sympathized with them in many respects. But, you know, I don't go in for the violentness that some of them did. MIT got off much easier than most places. They were much less obstructive than maybe even at Harvard.
Why, I wonder? Any ideas?
I think because of the general, they're also they were in those days. They were also involved in what they were doing at MIT. Yes, they knew and were aware of what was going on, but they weren't that much of an activist group.
Mm-hmm.
There weren't that many of them as there are now.
Do you think, given your views, that maybe Jephthah tried to calm Howard Johnson down and say some of what they're doing, you know?
I doubt it. I think
don't
they
think-
had a good relationship. I don't think there was any of that.
So after he rotated off the corporation,
I came right back
you were
on.
picked.
Yeah.
Were you
I know.
surprised when you were invited?
Yeah, I was.
Why?
Well, I don't know. I just, you know, I didn't expect it.
Did you ever talk to them about what made them invite you?
No.
But at that point, I guess Howard was still president, or Jerry Wiesner had become president?
No, Paul was president.
Paul was president by
I
the
came
time.
on in '79,
Aha.
and I think Paul had just
And did you know him much, or?
Well, I think we had met him because he was chancellor, wasn't he? Or
He was under Jerry.
under
yes.
Jerry, and with Jeff being on the corporation with Jerry, so that we did get to know Paul.
Uh-huh. What was the corporation like when you joined it? How did you always wonder, and here you were, and lo and behold, it was like
Well,
what?
but you see, when I was at Tech, no one had any awareness of the corporation or,
Right.
or anything that went on. I mean, there wasn't. And there was nothing like CJAC or anything like that. I mean,
Right.
maybe there were
invented
committees
later.
with students, but I certainly wasn't aware of it if there were.
No, CJAC, I think, was invented during the whole period of the riots in the late 60s
Yeah.
to give students
And
representation.
when I was on
a voice.
CJAC, what they were talking about was the apartheid
Right.
and the voting on the
Disinvestment from South
Disinvestment,
Africa,
yes.
wanting to get anything with
Yeah,
a relation
Jeff
out of
was involved
MIT's
with that, too.
portfolio.
Yeah.
But given that Jephthah had been on the corporation, I mean, did you sort of know what to expect by the time you got there, or?
I doubt it. I enjoyed it thoroughly, and I still do. I go to all the meetings, even though I'm emeritus and can't vote, but I can shoot off my mouth on occasion.
Do you think the trustees are influential in the way MIT is governed?
Oh, absolutely. I think, to me, I've been on the visiting committees now in 3 universities, Harvard, BU, and MIT. The difference is unbelievable. At Harvard, I was twice on the visiting committee for the Museum of Comparative Zoology, and the second time, the head of the committee was Bob White, who then went on to be head of the National Academy of Engineering, I think. And he admitted, yeah, I'm going to write a report, but it really doesn't matter. It's going to go into the trash. It's not going to, no one pays any attention. And the same, BU didn't, I was asked there because I knew an assistant to John Silber. And they somehow got the idea that they should have a visiting committee. But they didn't know what to do with it. And again, it was a very futile. It was interesting. I'm not saying both of them were very interesting, and I learned a lot. But as far as having any influence on the governance, I don't think it did. But at MIT, it very definitely does. To me, it's very impressive how the visiting committees, and I was on a whole bunch of them, it seems like, the caliber of the people that are on them. Well, the caliber of the people on the corporation is just astounding. And then the visiting committees, of course, bring in outside people as well. And it's very interesting, their questions and what they know and what they discuss and how they can relate to the professors in the departments. And there's a great deal of good flow of information back and forth, I think. And then the final part, when we talk to the administration, and they all come in, and they're interested, and they listen. And, you know, that makes it all worthwhile and really makes a big difference.
Can you think of any recommendations from any of your visiting committees where maybe they went a little against the flow or came up with something that wasn't in place where 6 months or a year later you could see the results, or was it sort of less?
Maybe if I was closer to then, I might be able to, but at this point, I'm afraid I can't, because you know that was 20 years ago.
On the corporation, you were also put on the executive committee, which was quite an honor, and
That was very
I had the
interesting.
sense that different people were there for different reasons. In other words, everybody brought something different.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever think about what your contribution was or what you were trying to do or why they valued you so much?
No, I didn't. I often
Looking
wondered-
back?
I wonder increasingly why they asked me to do that, but because I don't have the knowledge or but sometimes I can think about things and come at them from a different perspective or a different way of approach than other people.
Which I guess if you're trying to gather information and analyze, it's useful to have different points
Yes.
of view. And so
Certainly I
that
found
may
that
well
in,
be,
in
yeah.
committees that I've been on, that it's very helpful if people come at things from different
so there were a
points
lot of businessmen and a lot of people who know a lot about finance and
Yep.
whatever.
Yep.
And you came from the nonprofit world.
Well,
and
well,
headed-
yeah, just. But I had a lot of interests, and I've always been interested in education, but mostly in the environmental. I also have a strong environmental bend, so that's something I pushed. And back in those days, MIT wasn't very environmentally aware.
When you pushed it, what crossed your mind in terms of what maybe they could or should be doing? And
Oh no,
what did you
I used to tease them about their biology department because for all that I know a lot about botany and biology at this point, I've never taken a course in it. I always had just chemistry and physics, and I keep teasing them about their biology. I say, you know, I really wouldn't take a course in biology at MIT because you don't teach any biology that I'm interested in. I'm interested in the natural history of the natural biology.
sort of what they call ecology and evolutionary
yes.
biology
Yeah.
now?
Yeah,
And they were more genetics.
and they were genetics and test tube biology.
And test tube.
And
Did they ever have an answer?
No, I just was
No.
teasing them.
You ever try to cross-register?
No.
Take it somewhere else?
No. This was many years later.
Right.
This was when I was on the corporation.
And in terms of environmental things,
well, now
did
they
you-
do a lot.
Right.
And it's wonderful to see. And well, I was on the ocean engineering visiting committee for a while, and that was very interesting. And of course, that's very environmental. And then I was on the Sea Grant committee for many years, and they do a lot of environmental stuff.
I don't know
and always
anything
have.
about the Sea Grant Committee. What
Sea
did
Grant
it do
is-
and what was it like?
Sea Grant is a government project that they started, I just don't remember what year, but you know, we have the land grant colleges. MIT is a land grant college, which is
Right.
why we are co-ed and why we have ROTC. And there's some other thing we have because of it, but I can't remember what it is.
The governor sits on the board ex officio.
Yeah, I guess maybe that's it. And so they decided that we needed a Sea Grant program in the United States to study the seas because they were so important. And so MIT and Woods Hole became the Sea Grant colleges for Massachusetts. They split it.
Interesting.
And so we have a Sea Grant committee. Chris Christopherson is the head of it. That isn't his last name. It's a
Christopoulos.
Christopoulos, is it? Something like that. Well, Chris is great, and he's been a wonderful head of it. I've enjoyed very much all the meetings I've gone to. It gathers programs or it gathers research proposals from anyone at MIT that can work about the sea, about marine fisheries, about one of the things they studied was the effect of the water and waves on the offshore drilling platforms and the stresses. They are doing a lot now with exploratory unmanned submarine type, making them, that are doing studies in the ocean. Woods Hole, of course, has the Alvin, which is a submersible, and they do research around the world on the oceans. So Sea Grant was very interesting and important.
Did all states have well, I guess the inland states wouldn't have.
I don't think the inlands do, but I think the states around the Great Lakes and on the coast do.
Interesting.
And I don't know whether the inland ones, I don't think the inland ones do, but
And the
I'm not
land
sure.
grant programs were funded largely state by state, or
They're federal.
were they federal?
Yes, they are.
And the Sea grants were federal also?
Well, the land-grant colleges were given a piece of land.
Right,
That's where all the, out west especially.
right.
And I don't know how it worked in the East. I don't know how it worked for MIT, whether
Right.
we were given land or given a sum of money.
I don't even.
But the Sea Grant is funded, the proposals are funded and passed by the Sea Grant Committee in Washington.
And still ongoing.
Oh, yeah, very
Interesting.
active.
Another responsibility that you've taken very seriously over the years is your support for MIT's engagement with the community, the local community. I mean, one thing I recall is that every year you wrote letters to corporation members asking for them to
Still do.
give donations, contribute to the community service fund. Did you get much response? And
Oh,
how-
yes, I think the corporate, honestly don't know, because I don't get follow-up on it.
You don't get the checks.
No, and, but I know that the corporation has been very generous
Yeah.
to the fund. And the fund does a lot of good in Cambridge. It's very interesting being on that committee, because these Cambridge nonprofits present a proposal to you, and then you have to decide whether you have the money to fund it. And some of the proposals are presented by students who, in some cases, they're nonprofits that the students themselves have thought up and dreamt up and are running completely. Almost all of them. There are a couple that don't have much student input, but almost all of them have either staff or student input, and quite a lot.
And the budget is thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or?
Overall budget, gee.
Yeah. It probably grew over
It's
the years.
somewhere over 50,000, I would say.
What do you think is a university's obligation or responsibility to the community it's in? It's probably something you've thought about more than many people.
Well, I think they bring a great asset to a community, but they also they bring problems. And so the university has a delicate balancing act to try and minimize the problems of exuberant students, for instance. And also, MIT makes a very generous contribution to Cambridge in lieu of taxes. We are not taxed, and that is hard, and it's very hard on some of these cities especially. We used to have a wonderful man, I'm sure we do now, and I just don't know him, who was the front for MIT with Cambridge. And he just did such a wonderful job, and he was always at Cambridge and going to all the different mayor's things and all of that.
The liaison.
And he was a wonderful liaison. And that's very important. And we've always had much better relations, I think, than Harvard has with Cambridge. MIT has worked at it.
Yeah.
And really made an effort. And the students do a remarkable job. There are a lot of students now that do tutoring, one-on-one tutoring with kids. I know about it because my daughter teaches the students how to do the teaching. She's a teaching expert. And then she supervises what they do. And how they do it with the heavy load of work they have is always amazing. But they're religious about coming every week and tutoring their special child.
Do you think there's more of that than there used to be, or
Oh, yeah.
does it just ebb and flow?
I think there's more of it now. Well, there certainly was none of it when we were here, when I was here. And it was very different. But of course, you see, we didn't have a student center. We didn't have where the Stratton Center is. There was a row of stores, and there was a record shop with big Bill Schwan, and he's the one that wrote the book that published every record.
The catalog.
The
right.
catalog.
Right.
And then there was a drugstore, And there was a bowling alley upstairs.
And this was on Vassar Street? Or
No, this was on Mass Avenue.
on Mass Ave?
It was right just behind where the lights are now.
Where the student center and
But not that far back. It was right, you know, just a sidewalk from Mass Avenue.
between Bexley Hall and Vassar Street, I guess.
Yeah, but where the student center is now.
Uh-huh.
And the pharmacy there was where I used to eat lunch quite often. Had a counter.
Interesting. One of your ongoing activities still and passions has been the group you created, the Museum Institute for Teaching Science,
Yeah, and
which actually grew out of one of your...
it grew out of being on the executive committee, because on the executive committee we usually have a dinner the night before the meeting in the morning. And I used to sit next to Paul a lot, and he was talking, and this was in '82 and '83, and he was speaking about how the decreasing percentage of students going into science and engineering was very worrisome, of high school students, and something really ought to be done about it. And there was talk about high schools and about writing curriculum, but Jep had been counsel for the Educational Development Corporation back in the, after Sputnik went up, when Gerald Zacharias, Professor Zacharias from MIT, sort of founded EDC and developed the whole new way of teaching with the physics program. And that spun out into both biology and chemistry with new textbooks.
But
so there was a lot
was the beginning of
physics was the beginning.
Interesting.
And there was a lot of good curriculum developed in those days, some of which is still used. And I felt very strongly, I mean, I'd been intimately involved with Jep on that, or in that I knew all about it. And I felt very strongly that that's not the way to go, because it takes forever. It takes forever to write good curriculum, and then it takes forever to get it accepted, and then you've got to teach the teachers how to use it. And so that's a very long, drawn out, 10 years probably. And I felt very strongly that we needed to do something immediately. And the way to do it was to train the present day teachers and retrain them, sort of retread. And and I had worked a lot with various museums, been involved with a whole bunch of them. Jep had been president of the Children's Museum, and I'd been on the boards of a couple of them. And
All science museums, or?
well, I'd worked with the Science Museum, helped setting up their volunteer program. I'd been on the zoo board for 25 years. I'd been on Mass Audubon board for 25 years. I knew, I don't know that I knew, I guess I knew someone at the Museum of Comparative Zoology. Yes, because I'd been on that visiting committee. And so we had contacts between us with most of the science-oriented museums. So we finally had a dinner in February of '83. It's 25 years old this year, at my house, and I had Paul come, and we had the heads of Mass Audubon, the Museum of Science, the Aquarium, the Children's Museum, Museum of Comparative Zoology, Museum of the Arnold Arboretum. I've left out someone. And who did I leave out? Children's?
And
Oh, the zoo.
And the zoo.
And the zoo. And they didn't all know each other. So they did after that. And Roger Nichols, who was then president of the Museum of Science, head of it, chaired. I had Paul talk about the problem. And I said, look, you all know how to teach science so people like it. Do something. If Boston can't do something about this problem, no one can. And so Roger said, okay. He liked new ideas. So he said, I'll chair this. And so I don't know how often he got them meeting, but he really banged their heads together and got them meeting a lot.
And he was from which one?
Museum of Science, Roger
Museum
Nichols.
of Science.
And they decided that they could work together and they could come up with a program, and that it would be a 2-week, well, they first said 3 weeks, but after the first year it was 2 weeks. 3 weeks is too long. Program to teach teachers. And the museums would could do it. And so they gave it to their directors of education, and they sort of roughed out this plan. And then they got a small grant from the Cox Foundation in Boston and hired Frank Gardner, who was down at the Franklin Institute, but had grown up in Quincy and knew everybody. I mean, he'd worked for the Museum of Science, he'd worked for Mass Audubon. And so they, and he finished up a National Science Foundation report proposal, and they got 3 years of funding with 2 one-year follow-ons. So for 5 years they were funded by the NSF. And this started with a 2-week summer institute for K-8 teachers. And they went to a museum. In those days they went to one museum for the 2 weeks, except for the first and the last day all the groups came together. And they could take 12 teachers in each of the 7 museums. So we had 80 the first 3 years, we had 84 teachers each year. And then they added Manomet Bird Observatory in those days on the 4th year, and the 5th year they added Cape Cod Museum, the Worcester Museum, which is now the Ecotarium, and the Springfield Museum. So the last year they had 138 teachers. And then there was another year when they had a little money left over, and they ran a 1-week tropical forest, rainforest program for teachers. And they had 6 of the museums all had sort of contacts with tropical forests at that point, and they put it together, and their educators worked on it and gave the workshop. That was the first time the educators had all worked together, too.
Most of them had education departments.
Yes. These were all big museums, after all, and they all had education departments.
But they weren't really working directly with training science teachers in schools?
Well, they may have had programs. They may have had, Mass Audubon did a lot of in-school work, mostly with the kids themselves, with various classes.
Right.
And I think each of the museums had some take on some sort of teaching, mostly with students. And if they did work with teachers, it would be a one-shot workshop, 2-day, 1-day type thing.
And this was mostly for teachers of students between kindergarten and 8th grade?
Kindergarten and 8th grade.
Is it still focused on
It's still that.
Why the lower grades rather than high school? Or?
Everybody wants to fund high school. By high school, you've lost them.
Uh-huh.
In fact, by 3rd grade, you've lost most of the girls.
Really?
Yes. If you don't keep them interested. In fact, there's a professor here who's interested in math. He's in the space science department, or whatever it is, called Professor Natapov. And he has developed a math program. He feels very strongly that boys aren't ready for interesting math until the 3rd grade. Girls are ready in the 1st grade. And the textbooks are written for the boys. And the girls are board stiff by the time they get to 3rd grade. And he feels very strongly that boys and girls should be taught math separately in those early grades especially, and pushed as fast as whatever they can. He's developed a curriculum, I gather, and he did some work I think it was in Chelsea.
Yeah. So were you getting many, do schools even think about teaching science between kindergarten and 3rd grade?
Oh yeah, all schools. No, I won't say all schools now, but there've always been science in those grades. And one of the problems is that most of these teachers are women. Most of them are scared of science. They've not had any science training in their teacher training, or very little. They may have taken a general science course, but they're not usually very good. And so one of the things we do is the first day of the institute now. Well, let me just bring us up to date on the institutes. Because when I took over in '92, the institute changed from the teachers all going to one institute. We got involved with a state program that they had received money from called statewide initiative to change the teaching of math and science. And they called theirs Partnerships Advancing the Learning of Math and Science Poems. And we were the museum contact for partners. And so we branched out to 5 regions of Massachusetts and used 4 museums in each region so that you could use a small museum, because all they had to do was do a 2-day workshop, and then they'd repeat it if they had enough teachers. And it meant we could take 60 teachers in each of these districts.
Wow.
Because then they'd have 15, and that's a good number.
And the focus was still
The
science.
focus was still science. And so that's the way it has evolved. We're now in 9 regions, and the focus is science, but it's science, technology, engineering, and math, because that's what STEM, that is the thing. Mm-hmm. One of the problems now is that we have this we have the MCAS test, which Massachusetts put in for judging how the students are doing each year, and they take them at certain grade levels. They do take them in science, but they don't really count. The only ones that count are math and literacy. And then the No Child Left Behind came along, and that augmented and made that even more stringent. And so we have had trouble since those have gone in gathering enough teachers, because science doesn't count. Oh. And let's face it, if I said it was literacy or it was math, it would be easier to fill them.
Interesting.
But how can you teach science without literacy and math? I mean, no way. So I'm hoping things are going better now. We've got the State Department. There's a great guy who's running the math and science part of it. And he's come to MITS, and he's very interested in it. And the head of the literacy there has come to MITS and asked us to work with them on getting literacy and science together. So we've been presenting at their conferences.
Did MIT have any involvement in any of this after Paul's initial challenge to you, in a sense, and then his coming to your dinner?
Not really, except we have had the MIT Museum when they had an educator. They don't at the moment, but for several years they were one of our partners for the Boston area. We have in the Boston area we have the zoo, we have the aquarium, and we have the Children's Museum, and then we had the MIT Museum, and now we have the Museum of Comparative Zoology again.
Have you been able to branch into other states, or have other states come to look at you because they want to replicate this? Or?
I tried to get it going in California when I was when I was president of the MIT Association, because we went out to San Diego, right. Bill and I, and they wrote a proposal to the desk, because San Diego has a whole bunch of museums right around a quadrant or something, and I knew the head of one of them because he came from Cleveland, and but he wrote a proposal, and he was going to take 25 teachers. And it was going to be over 2 years, and he asked for $1 million, and needless to say, he got turned down. So he didn't get it. Yeah. But we were in New York State, in Syracuse, for 2 years, I think, or maybe it was 3. And then a lot of personnel changed, and there wasn't that much interest in it.
It takes a lot of tending.
Yes, it does.
And that's what you still do to a large extent,
well,
yes?
To a certain extent. But we've got a wonderful executive director now, and a whole new team, and really it's going very well, and it's quite exciting because we're getting turned to more. But we laid the groundwork. I mean, I've been running it since '92, and '93 was the first new program that we started. With '92 we were learning, because the PALMS program had a learning part of it. And so we've run it since '93 every year. We've had over 3,000 teachers take it.
Do any of them come back and do a second or third?
Steadily. We have people that have been back almost every year.
Really?
Yeah.
They love it?
They love it. And they have to keep a journal so we can see what their results are, how they feel about it.
And can you tell whether there are more students getting interested in science or staying interested in
That I
science?
can't tell.
Hard to
because
measure?
it's very hard to measure. I'd love to be able to do an evaluation, but we had Lesley University do an evaluation in 2000 of the results on 97, teachers who'd taken the course in 97 and whether they were still doing it and what have you. I mean, that cost $30,000, and they told us what we knew, which was if they came once, they learned something. If they came more than once, they learned more. If they came with a group, they learned even more. So,
Interesting.
and we now make a differentiation on the course. We now charge, and this year it's going to be $250 for the 2 weeks if you come alone. If you come with one other person, it's $225 each. If you come with 3 or more, it's $200. Because
And you have
we
your
really
friends
want
there
groups.
too, yeah.
Because
To
it makes a
plant
difference.
a
Yes.
critical mass
And-
within a school.
And that,
or-
yes, exactly. And so they can interact with each other during the school year.
Could you tell whether you were getting good representation, say, from inner city schools versus affluent suburban schools versus
Well,
whatever?
the very affluent suburban schools don't come. They know it all. I mean, Metro West, last year we couldn't run Metro West because we had no registrations.
Metro West is,
Concord, Lincoln, Weston, Wayland, all of
and
that
is it
area.
that the teachers aren't interested or that the schools won't let them and pay for it?
I
or-
honestly don't know.
'Cause I would-
We've only, in the years we've been running it, I don't think we've had more than maybe 3 teachers from Concord.
I wonder if they have other opportunities that other teachers
Maybe,
don't have.
I don't know.
Or,
Or they may have to take in Worcester, for instance, Worcester and Springfield are 2 urban systems that are very difficult to get teachers from. But they do a lot of their own in-house teacher training.
even in
and-
science.
Well, I don't know about that. But they have requirements that the teachers take these. And one of the reasons I think, I mean, don't tell them I said this, is that it means they keep the money in-house. And I can't blame them in a
Yeah.
way, but it's the teachers get so much from working with teachers from other school districts. I mean, that comes through in their journals.
Right.
They learn as much from the other teachers as they learn from the educators. And then we run professional development seminars for our educators, 3 in the winter. This year, the first one was on wind power, mostly, on energy. And then the one we had last week when I couldn't come was with Hector Galbraith from Manomet, who is an expert on climate change. And he evidently did a bang-up job. And the next one next week, or I think it's I guess it's in April later, is going to be on water.
Have you ever gotten involved with MIT's efforts to train teachers or to help students who think they might want to go into teaching?
Well, I've talked with Eric.
Eric, who's involved with what?
Who runs the K-12 thing, and we're,
Not
and I was
Kim
on a
Vanderveer, Kim Vanderveer?
No, Kim, I know Kim very well,
Right.
and I've talked to Kim.
Because he's done something,
Yes,
I
he's
think.
done a lot with the Edgerton Center.
But there's
and,
someone else, and Eric.
Yeah, Eric,
Anyway, we'll come back
I
with
can't
it
remember
later.
his name right now. But I was on a committee that they had for a while that worked, and of the people who were at MIT, and I think it's fallen by the wayside. They're also busy, the committee has.
Do you
But they
think
do a lot.
Yeah.
And I would love to get involved, but it's a problem of my trying to contact them and finding and working it out.
Right.
I've been busy too.
You've been busy. Do you think MIT could or should be doing more on the sort of educating K-12 teachers or training its own student body to go into teaching, or is there
Well, they
only
do
so
have-
much you can do?
They do have a teaching training course now. and they get a few, I don't know how many, it's not very big,
Right.
but those are students that are committed to going into teaching. And they get some pedagogy as well as their courses.
I occasionally hear about classmates who spend time in one career and then feel like they've done it and
Yeah.
they want another one, and sometimes they say, you know, it's time to go into teaching.
Yeah.
And I wonder if there could be some kind of program where
Well, that would be
MIT
a good
helps
idea. Yeah.
retools them over the summer or something.
Yeah.
That says, come brush up in science or math or whatever, and then you can
Yeah.
go forth. And,
Most of the MIT students will go into the high schools
right.
studying because they will go into a special. In the high schools, you'll get chemistry or physics or biology or something.
Right.
And that's probably the best place for them. It's sometimes hard for people at the university level to get down to the nitty-gritty of K8.
Yeah. Have you followed the progression of women at MIT? There were so few when
Yeah.
you were there, both as students and
Oh, I think
faculty. There
it's
were
wonderful.
either none or virtually none.
I think it's just wonderful, and I've always been interested in the fact that it's now 45% of the entering class are women.
Of the undergraduates,
The undergraduates.
And I don't know what the proportions look like at the graduate level compared to what they used to be. As you say, there were
know.
more of them then.
Yes, because that's harder to get because, as you know, each department admits their own graduate students.
Yeah. And the faculty, I guess it's been slower there in some departments. Do you?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, again, because it was so slow in having girls studying the courses in the undergraduate and the graduate level, that therefore the pipeline gets thinner and thinner and thinner when you get to the choice of people who want to teach and women who want to teach.
Yeah. We were talking about the increase in the number of women at MIT. Did you ever try to be a voice for feminism, or did you lobby to, push
No,
for more women?
That's
or
not my speed at all. I was very happy with the 100 men each woman. I thought that was great fun, having come from an all-girls school.
Yeah. What did you make of the whole Nancy Hopkins, the biologist at MIT who thought that women weren't being treated equally, I guess, in her department or her school, and started measuring offices and looking at things, and ultimately Chuck
You had that
and others
report.
found that
Which
indeed there was
says-
something
yeah.
to her.
Yeah. Well, Professor Bergeron it was his department that.
Who was dean of the School of Science
Yes,
at that point, I
and-
guess.
Yes, and he was the one that really pushed it and then changed the
Yeah.
atmosphere there very much.
Were you
I'm sure that is true. I have never experienced it, but then I've never been in the same situation that women who are looking for jobs and looking for advancement have been in. So it's not, I can't judge. So,
Were you surprised, though, that this organization that you had been so loyal to and liked so much and thought well of, in fact, sort of hadn't been doing quite right by at least some of its women?
not really surprised, I don't think. I think because times have changed so, and it's hard for a large organization to keep up with the changing times, because things always change much faster than a big organization can move. But I think that MIT acted very promptly, and when this was brought to light and studied, and has made big strides and efforts to equalize and make it a level playing field for everybody. And I trust they have. I don't know. But I'm sure it's a lot better than it was.
Do you talk much with women who are students here? Is there any kind of sort of informal mentoring system through?
I think there is. I have not gotten involved with it because I've been so busy with, well, we have 4 children, and so those kept me busy as well as the various volunteer
Right.
things that I did. And So I have not had that kind of a contact with
Yeah.
MIT and with the students, and I don't go to the amateur meetings, for instance.
It strikes me that you know so much about the nonprofit world that conceivably students who are thinking of going into that might occasionally call you to ask for
Well, I
advice.
would be glad to help anyone that was interested.
Yeah,
in
I don't know
any
how many
way.
students go that direction right
I
out of
don't-
college.
no, I don't
It's
either.
often something that they come to later.
Yeah, I think so, because I think right out of college, so many of them have debts that they would have to pay off.
You've seen several different presidents up close. You've kind of had a front row seat being on the corporation, first with Paul Gray as president, and then with Chuck Vest, and now with Susan Hockfield. I wonder if you could talk a little about the style, the challenges each one faced and that MIT faced, say in the 80s when Paul was president. What were the issues and how
Heavens.
did he try to address them, and then what were the next? Big question. I know.
The big question, and I've enjoyed them all, and I find they all have brought so much wisdom and knowledge and interest in what they're doing and in the people around them, and real concern for MIT and the people that make up MIT. They may approach them differently. They may have different strengths. Some may be good at administration and some may not. I don't really know. But what comes through loud and clear with all of them is their real concern and interest in MIT and in the quality of what it produces, of the quality of what it gives its students, and the care and the feeding of both the faculty and the students. And they're each different, but that's the same in all of them. Mm-hmm. And it's inspiring to see that, because it isn't this business of, well, I'm important and what I'm doing is what is important. What's important is what MIT, the results for MIT.
Right. MIT had a series of presidents who had been at MIT previously, either as students or as faculty members or both. And then Chuck came in from the outside, as did Susan Hockfield. Do you think it makes much of a difference? Is it good to go back and forth just to bring in fresh blood, or is it really more a matter of the person? Or
I think sometimes it is good to bring in people from outside, because they do have a different take. They do have they've had different experiences, and they've had different ways of doing things that seem different ways of doing things at other places, and so that is an advantage, I think. And yet, homegrown talent is always nice. It's maybe more comfortable.
yeah,
But it also, in some respects, it may address some of the deeper, if there are deeper problems that are harder for an outsider to understand or to latch on to. Someone that comes from the inside may have a better insight into them.
For the research universities, the selective ones, engineering seemed to be a big component for decades, century, whatever. And then it seemed to fall out of favor a little. I think Yale did away with their School of Engineering at some point.
Huh.
I think Harvard wasn't big in that area, but suddenly, in the last decade or so, they're moving into more applied science and what we'd call engineering, I guess. Do you think MIT will become less unique as we see?
Well, I think
Science
Harvard's
get
trying
hotter?
very hard to catch up, but they're sort of stymied now with their hole in the ground in Brighton, which they can't finish.
Because of the financial problems.
Yeah. I think, yes, I think MIT probably will be a little less unique, but it never will lose its uniqueness, because the thing that strikes me about tech and really I think is so exciting is this business of, if you're here, you can take a course in almost any department you want to. You don't have to be stuck in a groove that says, all right, you're an electrical engineer, you can only take electrical engineering prescribed courses. And that opens up so much for people. And it sparks their curiosity, it keeps their interest and helps them to branch out and be, well, a Renaissance man or woman.
Or woman.
In that they have a much broader gauge. I mean, even when I was here, I took international politics or international law, I guess it was called. It was taught by Norman Padelfit, and he'd been out in San Francisco setting up the whatever, one of the international organizations. And I sat in on Jep's History of Architecture course, which was fascinating. It was all slides, and I learned so much. And I took a geology course. I mean, these had nothing to do with chemistry, but they broadened my interests, and they're things that have come back always. And that's what I always tell my kids or grandchildren, that college should be a time to explore. Yes, you may have a major and you may concentrate on that, but it still should be a time to explore other types of knowledge, other avenues. You'll never go and be an archaeologist, for instance, but take a course in archaeology. It'll be fascinating. And it just broadens your whole life.
You studied, your major was chemistry. You took a variety of other courses, but then you didn't go on in chemistry per se. Do you feel that your MIT education did shape what you were able to contribute, as you did carve out your career in a different, in what ways?
I'm a bird bander. I've been a student of birds and a student of ecology. I branched out and moved over into the student of the natural world. But certainly the training and the studying and what I did at MIT had a grave influence on being able to do what I've been doing.
The MIT has its first woman as president, and I guess there have certainly been women in leadership positions at MIT before that. I mean, the head of resource development under Chuck was a woman, and there were some women deans, Nan Friedlander for the School of Human. Do you think women think and manage differently,
Yes,
or no?
very
in what
definitely.
way? How?
I don't know. It's pretty hard to say how, but I've learned this from running MITs. And women really have a very different take on looking at problems and on working out through problems and getting things accomplished than men do. And it's very interesting. And I had always thought that having been really brought up by a man, I mean, yes, I had a stepmother, but not until I was 5, and Daddy and I were always very close. And there were a lot of men around the place anyway. We're on a farm. And I had always related well with men, and this was, in fact, better than with women because I hadn't had the closeness with women. So I've been surprised at how much I have enjoyed working with women, because I have an all-woman staff and have had at MITS. And that somehow we seem to get things accomplished with less, I don't know, toing and froing or going back and forth or something. But there's very definitely a different way of approach. And it's hard to say what it is.
Do you think that may be less true of women who've trained in science and engineering? In other words, is it a question of what you focus on and how logical you are or methodical, or is there something else in your view?
I think the angle of approach is different, no matter what you're training.
Any examples come to mind that would illustrate it?
Not
really.
readily.
Okay. As with the economy in the deep downturn and the financial markets a mess, one thing President Obama is emphasizing is reinvestment in science and
I know, I'm
in
so
energy.
pleased. And they're not going to blackline all the EPA reports from their scientists. Did you ever see copies of the EPA reports?
No.
I've seen pictures of them.
Yes.
The scientists would write a paper about big black lines through all the
Oh, where they crossed
where
out.
they crossed out the scientific background for what they didn't want.
You think this will change?
Yes,
Oh,
definitely.
for the better, I take it.
For the better.
Do you think we're headed for a new era of science, like the post-Sputnik era? Do you think?
I think we're close to it.
Uh-huh.
I really do. I think there's a business group that's just spoken out quite forcefully about the importance of science and education. And there's a lot of talk in the business world about the importance of science. I wish they'd fund us.
Are you getting any tremors yet in your MITS program in terms of calls beginning to come in or saying, oh my, we need to improve our science teaching and you're the only game in town?
Well, I think in part that's where the literacy woman comes from, in that she's come to us about incorporating science in the literacy program.
This is the state of Massachusetts.
This is the state of Massachusetts. And that's a big step.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm pleased about that.
What do you think at this point that MIT does best, and what do you think it does less well? If somebody could give you a wand to wave and say, here are 3 things you could create here or change here, do you ever?
I think, to me, it's what it's been doing so well, I think. But don't forget that from the corporation point of view, it's only a very small snapshot. So you don't have, because I don't go around and talk to a lot of different people at Tech. I know some of the men do and what have you. They know a lot more than I do. And I'm not on any visiting committees at the moment because I'm emeritus. But to me, it is this business of the cross-fertilization between the departments and the working together and the setting up of these centers that draw on professors from all parts of the institute. It's just a wonderful thing. I mean, we need more of that. We need all over the country. We need that in every field, not just in the science fields. But we've got here, I mean, Sloan is even getting involved now, and that is a big step forward, because for quite a while, Sloan was sort of down the river by itself, running itself. And yes, it was part of MIT, but only barely. And now they're really involved. From what I can see, they've got Sloan crossing over in with the engineers and with the scientists and working on joint problems. And that is marvelous, and it's just what it should be. I think that is one of the great strengths that MIT has and gives. And then the open courseware is just fantastic.
You mentioned your year of being president of the Alumni Association and traveling to San Diego and using that as a platform to see if you could do something in the science teaching area. What else did you do during that year?
I went to Huntsville, Alabama,
Yes.
to see. We went to visit a corporation. I don't remember the corporation, but I remember the Space Museum there. It's fascinating,
Right.
where they have a capsule and they have all sorts of things. And I'm sure it's much better now. This was a long time ago, after all. And
Were there many alumni in that area, or
I gather
a
this
couple,
this
a
company
hand?
was an alumnus, and
Did you do any travel around the world to
No,
other
I didn't.
countries at that point?
well, I went. We were going to Paris, and I did see the Jean-Yves Gresser, who we had been host family for, and he's very active in the Paris club, MIT club, and we had dinner with them. I unfortunately got sick in the middle of it, but it was, that was very interesting. And we didn't travel any place else, but we have, because we also were host family to a boy from Thailand who came as a freshman. Jean-Yves didn't need a host family. He'd just been cruising through the Yucatan in a canoe or something, looking at archaeological monuments. But we've maintained friendship with Jean-Yves ever since. And then with Savi Botoiho, his father was an air marshal, and his mother was the head of the Queen of Thailand silk factory. I think that was just the name of it. I don't know that it had any connection with the Queen. And but Savi knew the princess who was here from Thailand, was studying at Harvard.
Who was a student here?
Yeah.
Ah.
And then we've visited them in Thailand, in Bangkok. And Savi has stopped by and seen us on occasion when he's in this country. He hasn't in a long time, but one day all of a sudden here he appeared in a taxi. Came to see us. Just
What
for
does a
few
host
minutes.
family do?
Well, it varies with the person that you get. And you try to make a foreign student feel comfortable and solve their problems and help them to get adjusted to being in the United States. And, Savi's sister came with him. They came from London, and they had been body searched in Logan. And she was shaken up. I felt for her. And they stayed with us about a week, but normally they don't stay with you. She came to get him settled in his freshman dorm.
Was this recently? I mean,
No,
post
this was a long time
9/11?
ago.
Oh.
No, long before that.
They did the searches even before
yes.
9/11?
This was because of drugs coming in because they were from Thailand and stopped over in London.
Interesting. And every foreign student to MIT has
They
a host?
used to. I don't know whether they're still running it.
Uh-huh.
Mrs. Padelford was one of the major movers of it. And it
Interesting.
was very interesting. And we had a whole series of them. And but most of them just, you had them for dinner or something. You didn't do much with them.
Did you get a sense of how MIT is regarded in other countries and how college educations are regarded, and just sort of whether these students are different in any way other than the country they come from the American students? If you saw a number of them go by, I wondered if there were any patterns that emerged.
No, one of the others that we had was Saud al-Sawail, and his brother was Faisal al-Sawail. They were Arabs, Saudi Arabians, and his brother was either his brother or his father was ambassador to the United States, and his passion was music. And he had gone to Germany and studied music. And then his family said, you got to be an engineer. So they sent him to MIT. And the next thing I knew about him after he left was he was the spokesperson for OPEC and on the radio. And then at one point he was the manager of the ships that go in to load oil, because they go in and then they're rotated, and it's very tricky to get them, in and full, and then the next person in as soon as you move the other one out. So he was that. And then the other thing I heard was a composition of his was played at the Salzburg Music Festival.
Ah. Do you know if he connected with the music department here when he was here?
I don't know.
You don't?
No.
As MIT and the rest of the academic world seem to be trying to get more international, which means a whole lot of different things. Do you have any thoughts on
well,
that?
I think that's wonderful, and I think it's much. But MIT's been doing that for a long time. Way back, they helped found the Technology University of India, or whatever it's called. I don't know what the name of it is, in India, and were very instrumental in getting that started and going and working with that. And of course, their Singapore project is quite fascinating, and the one in Cambridge seems to be working pretty well.
Right, and I guess you were on the corporation as these things were being put together.
The thing that, when I was on the corporation, the big thing that I remember the most was the formation of the Whitehead Institute, and all the studies and talk and conversations about that. That was very interesting.
Issue that had they been looking for a home, and other universities?
I think so. I think Jack Whitehead had tried to place it somewhere else.
Yeah.
And it just hadn't worked out.
And was there much hot debate within the?
There was a lot of discussion, and it was very interesting, and I think from everything I've heard, it's worked out very well. And
have you stayed involved with the Whitehead? Were you on the board?
we are on that. We go to their annual meetings and what have you, and Jeff was interested in them.
Do you think there's something about the way it was structured that made it work?
Yeah, and I think David Baltimore had probably a lot to do with it, who was the first head of it. He's a very, very competent individual in many fields.
You talked about, at the very beginning, being fascinated by uranium. I wonder if you still are, and if you've nuclear power and
no, I'm not I think nuclear power has so many problems. I mean, yes, it doesn't create CO2, I guess. I'll bet you they find it does somewhere. But anyway, it has so many problems and what I think many people don't equate with it is the damage and the problems of mining it, because that is a very severe problem. Also is the exposure of the miners in digging it out of the ground. It's not as bad as when it's all concentrated, but it's still radioactive.
And you've remained interested in the birds, the uranium. Do you think there's no birding club at MIT, I don't think, that I'm aware of?
The Dames have one.
Do they really?
Yes. They always have had a bird watching club.
How does that work?
They have a lot of committees for the women, the wives of the professors and people on I assume staff's involved too, I don't know. And out of the Emma Rogers room. And they have a bird watching group that meets monthly.
Is there still a Dames organization?
Oh, yeah.
It sounds like
I think
a
it's
different,
called that.
Guys and dolls.
Yeah.
Dames. And, so that was, I guess it was founded decades
Way
ago?
back, yes.
More?
And
to get
Priscilla is very involved.
Priscilla Gray.
Yeah. And she used to always have a course in because she does beautiful crewel work.
Right.
In crewel. And so they have different committees, and they offer courses. I think they have a cooking group and things like that.
Are the male spouses
they're the women
invited now? But
I
given
don't
that so
know.
many women now go off and have their careers instead of feeling sort of left behind and therefore needing to be involved.
I don't know what the makeup is.
So do you lead or help
No, I haven't been
the,
involved in that.
the bird?
Not here.
classes?
No, a long time ago, I used to lead weekly bird walks in Bedford.
It's interesting that at the same time that students don't seem to get a lot of science training in school, that interested in bird watching, among other things, has really
Yeah.
boomed.
It really has.
You've spent a lot of time with MIT over the years, especially
Yeah.
40, 50 years. Do you think it's changed you, or I mean, how would you characterize the impact it's had on your life?
Oh, I think certainly, because I think it's opened, for one thing, I've met lots of interesting people. And it's opened my eyes to a lot of the research and different avenues that I would never have been involved with, or at least involved with, even to just the extent of reading about them or watching, and it sparked and encouraged and made my interest, for instance, in the NOVA shows grow. And I have the background to understand a lot more of what's going on. And I think it's been a wonderful experience and very broadening and just I've enjoyed every minute of it.
And have you worn your brass rat, your MIT ring, ever since you graduated?
Well, I did. I wore it to my wedding and everything. And there's a picture of me with my hand like this, and the only thing you can see is the brass rat. And then my son dropped it down the John.
Oh.
So for many years I didn't have one. So then I went and got another one. I've worn it since.
So you still feel this deep
Oh, yeah.
loyalty.
Yes, very definitely.
So,
It's a great place.
well, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and memories. And
Thank you, Karen, for
enjoyed
taking
it.
the time to do this.